Do not use animals to do what you call research. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. Let the animals go. And you can sign up yourself to be the next subject in the laboratory. Let the animals go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Toward Equality of Life. Here we are in the month of January, very late January, the year 2002, at the BNN TV studio in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Coming to you with a show today on one of my most cherished topics, which is to say the problem of poor animals in general, and specifically the problem of poor animals in research, in laboratories, being experimented upon, being used as objects for experimental design. And so to this end, I have with me a person who would probably describe himself as an activist on behalf of animals, who puts a lot of time into it and devotion. And he's associated with a campaign in the United States which is involved in trying to shut down a laboratory, or a bunch of laboratories, we'll find out, in England, known as the Huntingdon Science Laboratories. And his name is Ethan Hawke, and welcome to the show, Ethan.
Thank you.
Now, you're a pretty young fellow as I look at you, and you told me you're 22 years old.
Yes, ma'am.
You are. Now, what do you feel about animals in general first, not counting research?
The general feeling is that animals are not ours to experiment on. They're not ours to eat or to wear or to be entertained by. That's a general ethic that applies to all animals regardless of their species.
How did that feeling or idea come to you?
I became vegetarian when I was 13, and then eventually became vegan, which means I abstain from all animal products, including dairy and eggs and honey. So it's gradually you get to the point where you recognize that all animals, again, regardless of their species, have intrinsic rights and values.
How did you at 13, though? Was that something that just sprung from your own consciousness, shall we say?
There was some exposure from my older sister who was trying to become vegetarian. But there was also a lot of interest in the environment and in the earth, particularly after reading Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which discussed animals being killed because we were spraying pesticides and insecticides.
And it made you feel badly?
Exactly.
Would you say you're a sensitive fellow?
Yes, I would definitely say I'm a sensitive fellow.
So if you see something like bees dying or because of premature colds, like we have after they've come out early for the spring, and then premature warmths, they come out early and then they die prematurely because summer is not really here, and so their biology gets a false signal. Would that make you sad to see them dying on that cause?
That certainly would make me sad. I mean, it's the premature colds are as a result of how we're living, our lifestyles, and the pollution that we're exposing the earth to.
So do you love to be in nature?
I enjoy it. I live in a city because it enables me to do what I need to do for the animals.
And maybe you're like myself, where you really want nature to be there even if you're not living in it. So you feel, I guess members of your family, at least one, maybe more, are sensitive to animals, was a background.
Certainly.
And the environment.
Yes.
Okay. And how did you come on to research on animals and experimentation on animals?
When I began college, I became very involved in the animal rights movement here in Boston. That movement has grown to be, for me at least, it was just a Boston thing, and now it's very, very much international, especially on this campaign to close Huntingdon Life Sciences. So I've chosen to focus on animal research, partly because of this campaign and because of the potential for success on this campaign, and the potential to save so many animals with closing down this one corporation.
What did you study in college?
Politics and sociology.
I see. Did it have any interface with animal problems?
They don't directly relate to animal liberation issues, but it's a larger picture that it's not just the animals that I'm concerned about, it's also about the earth, and it's also about human beings, there's a broad spectrum of exploitation and destruction that's going on today that we can't just end one problem, we have to end them all together.
So would it be fair to say that you care about animals as much as the environment and vice versa, or does one take precedence over the other?
I believe fighting for the animals is fighting for the earth, because we're fighting for their habitats, and their, I guess I should say, our habitats as well, humans and non-human animals. So it's, when you do fight for the animals, you're fighting for something much larger than just the specific lives of individual animals.
I'd rather fight for the specific lives of individual animals. I'm very much environmentally conscious and saddened as well, and one has to put these things, in my opinion, into denial, because if one were to be conscious of them acutely every moment, you'd be paralyzed practically. You wouldn't be able to bear the anguish. But in completing the thought there that I'm making, I think humans are responsible for their own demise, and when the environment goes, it will be, very bad for us. It is very bad for us as it is going down now, but the animals are much more in sync with the environment. They have no way to protect themselves against what we're doing, and it's just much sadder and much more profoundly horrible that animals suffer, especially at either indirectly or directly at the hands of humans.
I mean, what I see it as is we can fight for individual animals' lives, and we can save those animals, or we can make their lives better. But in the long run, animal exploitation is continuing. So by joining in a larger campaign, in something that's national or something international, we can have the most effect, because the greatest number of us are working against a certain element of animal exploitation and trying to end it.
Oh yes, I understand that. I'm just saying that if you see animal abuse directly, whether it's in great numbers or small numbers, I think that's way more compelling and gripping to feeling totally desperate and without justification in life than it is to see what we're doing that brings problems to our own selves, not counting the animals, is what I'm saying. It's much more pitiful that animals would be suffering than that humans would be suffering, because we're the perpetrators. So, have you? Are you more focused on animals in research when in your thinking and your activities in general?
My thinking is that all animals have a right to life and should not be experimented on or worn or eaten, as I said before. My activities at this present time are focused on animals in research facilities, specifically in Huntingdon Life Sciences.
Mainly because politically you think that would be or practically that would be a very good result if you could achieve it.
I suppose you could say practically. For the last 30 years, campaigners have targeted Huntingdon Life Sciences in their 2 laboratories in England, and they have 1 in the United States. After a series of undercover investigations into the laboratory, a very intensive campaign began just about 2 years ago, and Huntingdon Life Sciences was bankrupt a year ago, and actually today is the 1-year anniversary of them being saved from bankruptcy by a firm that is now attempting to pull out of the lab. So we're on the verge of closing them down, and when we do that, that's 180,000 animals that won't die every single year inside of those laboratories.
Now, have you been inside of laboratories yourself?
I've never actually been into one. I've seen primate breeding colonies.
You have?
Yes.
Where did you see the breeding colonies?
In Southborough, Massachusetts, the National Institutes of Health funds, through Harvard Medical School, the New England Regional Primate Research Center and they have a large primate breeding colony there. They keep about 1,500 primates on hand at all times, and about half of them are for breeding, half of them are for experimentation.
Were you able to tour that facility?
No, I was not able to tour
Well,
it.
how did you see it?
Their facility borders the woods, and you can pretty much, it's
You can see what's going on?
Yes.
I see. So that would be the only breeding colony that you're familiar with?
On a one-on-one level, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar. There have been other breeding colonies that I know some information about.
Do you know anything about breeding colonies that produce mice, for example, which is the most used, or rats, I should say, are the most used animals in research?
About an hour north of here in Wilmington is Charles River Laboratories. They're the world's largest breeder of rodents for animal experimentation. But I'm not particularly familiar with their operation in Wilmington or their other facilities where they breed these animals. They have done some work to breed mice that are transgenic, meaning they have genes from other species. So they bred a mouse that, or a species of mice, I should say, or a type of mouse that has human cancer genes. That's one of the things that they've done. They've bred hairless mice. They also, off of Key West, they have an island that they own, which was a primate breeding facility, and the primates completely destroyed the island.
Who destroyed the island?
The primates.
They did?
Just because it wasn't a natural habitat for them, and so they overran it, and the ecosystem is completely destroyed there.
Mm-hmm. So how many animals are bred, let's say in this country more or less? Do you have an idea?
No. I would never venture to guess that.
We might be in the millions, or are we in the
hundreds
of thousands?
I would probably say millions.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Just animals in factories being mass-produced to be sold to research facilities to be used?
Just based off of the number of primates that are, off the number of rodents, mice, and rats. Either we're in the millions or we're very, very close to it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the laws that regulate animal experimentation in this country, the Animal Welfare Act, doesn't regulate rodents as much as it would primates.
Right, they don't have the protections.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And in fact, wasn't there something recently where they got some kind of protections they hadn't had before?
There's an effort by some national organizations to put those protections in place. I don't know what the status of those efforts are because, again, it's Congress. It gets tied up easily.
Mm-hmm. Protections that are against undue pain, poor housing, those kinds of protections.
Exactly.
Yes. But even I would suppose that animals born with genes carrying disease, which probably proliferates in their body as a matter of, the point being that they would develop these things, are bound to be suffering just for being born the way they are.
Well, they're going to be suffering under the conditions that they're born into, the conditions that they're forced to live in. These are not cages. If someone had kept a mouse in their house, as sort of a companion animal, otherwise known as a pet to many people. The animal might live in a cage with wood chips and toys and a little wheel to run around it. These animals in laboratories don't get those things. They don't get space to play. They're living literally on top of each other. Certainly not rodents, but animals like dogs would be living quite possibly in cement and steel cages. And the other thing to realize is that although these animals have foreign genes put into them, spliced into their own genes, it's an attempt to recreate human diseases, which you can't do in non-human animals. A mouse will not get Alzheimer's. A mouse might demonstrate symptoms of Alzheimer's, but it's not Alzheimer's. And we're not going to be able to prove anything as a result of these symptoms that this mouse is demonstrating.
Mm-hmm. Well, my position on that is I don't care if we do prove something, which we do not, but I don't even care about that question. How medicine should proceed is a whole other topic, and we're not proceeding very well on that, really, in a way.
Certainly not.
In a way, but if it were the case that doing these dastardly things to animals were to result in nirvana for us tomorrow, it's impossible to do it. It wouldn't. I say not on the backs of animals. In spite of the fact that you can't do it anyway. But if you could, forget it.
Well, it's completely unethical.
Completely. As long as we're not the animals, It's okay, I guess. Now, how are mice living in these breeding colonies? Are they really packed in rats?
It really depends what stage of the study they might be in. If they've just been bred, they might be living a large number of them to a small cage or small.
Which breeds aggression, we know.
Certainly breeds aggression.
So they're tearing each other up too,
and
probably.
then one of the constant problems of confining any animal, whether it's human or non-human, are stereotypic behaviors.
Which is aggression turned towards itself because there's nothing else you can do. Stereotype behaviors being what?
Typical examples are biting, self-mutilation. In primates, it typically gets to spreading their feces on the wall, throwing feces, that sort of thing. But it's primarily biting and mutilation of the self.
Are there documentations about animals doing these kinds of things
There's studies.
in breeding colonies or labs?
There's federally funded studies going on in Massachusetts. There's probably thousands and thousands of dollars being wasted on determining that when primates are put in small cages, they'll pace back and forth and then they'll mutilate themselves.
I see. And so will the rats.
Exactly.
I know. They'll eat off their feet and everything if they're stressed enough. Yes. Okay. So you've not been in the labs yourself, but I guess you talked to people who
I've
have
met
been.
individuals who have
Yes,
been.
you've made individuals who have been. Well, what's the nature of this business, Huntington?
Life Sciences?
Yeah. What is the nature? Why is it there?
Huntington Life Sciences is a contract animal testing facility. That means that they don't try to develop products for themselves like, say, Procter & Gamble or Gillette might try to, but they test for, they used to test for Procter & Gamble and for Gillette. People contract to them, pay them a certain amount of money to carry out these experiments. Huntington Life Sciences is one of the world's largest as far as contract animal testing is concerned, and probably the world's largest as far as toxicology testing. So Huntington Life Sciences, they specialize, although they do dabble a little into pharmaceuticals, they specialize primarily in pesticides, agricultural chemicals, household cleaners, industrial cleaners, and then into food colorings, cleaning solutions, and that sort of, and suntan lotions.
So you say they can be, you can purchase, a company or a person with enough money can purchase their services to run tests, mostly for toxic substances on animals.
Yes.
Sometimes for new medicines or whatever reason a medicine needs to be studied, but mostly for toxic substances. Now, you mentioned the toxic substance generically, but what are they specifically? What would be some?
Oh, again, cleaners
like
and
what?
pesticides. Do you mean specific company, brands?
Like Clorox bleach or?
Until 1997, Procter & Gamble did use Huntington Life Sciences for some testing. After they were exposed, Procter & Gamble stopped doing that. Specific products, as far as toxicology is concerned, I wouldn't be able to name.
Well, when you say cleaning, do you mean for cleaning windows, cleaning
floors?
You
would have both household and industrial cleaners. So some sort of like heavy-duty industrial bleach to clean the floor of, say, a slaughterhouse or a factory where it gets very greasy and oily and they need something to cut the grease on there. Or a household cleaner that's meant to clean windows without streaks or leave your glasses coming out of your dishwasher spotless, that sort of thing.
Okay, so what do they do when they test a product? What would be an example of how they go about it?
Well, Huntington Life Sciences, as well as many other animal research facilities, likes to use beagle puppies, particularly because they're so docile and they don't tend to bite back. So one of the more common things that they do is they will shove a tube down a beagle puppy's throat. So say a 4-month-old beagle puppy will have some blood work done, and a lot of these workers are very incompetent, is something to really know about them, and this is something that's been documented with SIN.
Wait a minute, before you go on, what do you mean they're incompetent?
They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to they don't know how to draw blood, they don't know how to do the blood work. They're not really concerned about the work that they're doing, they just are concerned about getting a paycheck. Well,
England has been quite well known for being in the vanguard of animal rights. They were the beginners of the anti-vivisection movement.
Certainly.
And one would think that they would have laws in place that the people working around animals were technically proficient and had even sort of degrees in that capacity?
Well, similar to how we have the Animal Welfare Act in the United States, they have the Good Animal Laboratory Practice laws, and they have a committee that will review that. In 1997, Huntingdon Life Sciences almost lost its right to its license to vivisect, to dissect live animals, that is, because of the documented footage that was taken from the lab. In 2000, an individual walked into a Huntingdon Life Science laboratory in Auckland in England, started leafing through personnel files, and discovered that that laboratory had 41 violations of the Good Laboratory Practice, from the Good Laboratory Practice Committee. And then there were a slew of conduct violations from the employees at that laboratory, incompetency on the job, drug use on the job.
In other words, they should have been competent. They were hiring the right people?
They were hiring the wrong people. They were hiring people who aren't concerned about the animals. They were hiring people
But technically they were supposed to know what they were doing?
They were supposed to know.
They did have sort of licenses or whatever.
They may have had, obtaining a veterinary technician license is, the skills to do that job is not particularly difficult, especially in this country. But even in the United States, in the undercover investigation from 1997, there's videotape footage of an individual saying, "Oh, I'd really like to get into this research. How can I get a job here? Doing actual research rather than just being someone who might clean the cages or might take blood from an animal." And the researcher, while he's cutting open an animal, says, "Well, you don't need any special training. I think they're hiring you to just go and apply, and I'm sure you'll get the job."
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for one reason or another, they weren't living up to the standards of what their role should be.
Exactly.
Okay, so there they are with beagles that are more docile.
Mm-hmm.
And docility, or being docile, must be an important characteristic.
It's an important characteristic when you're trying to shove a tube down the throat of an unwilling animal. But these researchers, not only are they doing that, they're also, when they go to do take blood, they don't know where the veins are. They're just poking around, prodding, hoping they hit a vein.
Well, they should know if they've studied it.
Yeah, they should know,
but they don't.
They've been documented on film, on video, doing just that.
Okay, so we have persons who are either negligent, or, according to you, negligent, or are not proficient at what they're supposed to do, taking animals for these toxicity tests and doing things with them. Now, what are they doing exactly? The animals in a cage, are they one dog to a cage, do you know?
Sometimes they are. Sometimes they have to separate out the animals. One of the typical things that people will talk about in terms of the look of an animal, of a lab where animals are being experimented on, is you have rows of cages of animals, and then there are typically notes on every cage, and they'll say things like, feed animal once a day, or administer this drug at certain times, and then you'll come to cages where it says, don't administer the drug, or don't administer any food, that this animal is meant to be starved. And as...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Why is an animal meant to be starved?
It's really, the basis of this experimentation is to determine what happens when an individual, a human individual, would begin taking a drug, and then what would happen if the individual lost their appetite, or if the individual wasn't getting the right nutrients. What is this drug, this chemical, going to do to the body? So if an infant swallows some household cleaner that was tested at Huntingdon Life Sciences, and Huntingdon Life Sciences said, oh, this product is safe, and got it out on the market, which Huntingdon Life Sciences does, those sorts of things, and that infant somehow managed to drink this household cleaner, this say some sort of bleach, we're going to, we'll see that the infant, say if the infant were to lose a desire to eat, then Huntingdon Life Sciences could say, well, we starve the animals, and we know that when an individual loses the desire to eat, the drug can work faster through the system, or something along those lines. So it's really a matter of, although you might say that they're checking all the angles and trying to figure out all the different possibilities, a lot of it really boils down to negligence on the part of the researchers. They really don't know what they're doing, and frankly, they don't care what they're doing.
But actually, sometimes, according to you, there are notes on cages that says this one is not to be fed.
Well, that's something typical that's said about animal experimentation labs, is that some animals are starved and some, these animals will have a researcher walk by them and the animal gets excited, especially if it's a beagle. It's going to get excited that there might be some compassion coming from this person, that this person might give them some food or water, and the researcher just keeps walking on.
Or a pet. Yes, I remember once I read of a very quote-unquote legitimate study with chimpanzees.
Mm-hmm.
These things are so hard for me to talk about that I really can't keep them in my consciousness. Each one housed individually next to each other in a room.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to study the level of corticosteroids under stress, some animals would be fed and others were allowed to just be passed by.
Mm-hmm.
And they were measuring their stress levels of steroids.
It's awful.
One has to question the dynamic of just the practical, maybe even financial investment of doing this, whatever, merit investment, and the even more subliminal tendency to want to do harm, tendency to want to hurt. You have to question if that kind of thing is in there, if it's in the mix. Because how could you allow a chimpanzee to not get its food while the others are being fed?
Well, that's the sort of people that these companies draw to them, that they draw to do animal research. Some of these individuals might think that they're going to find a life-saving drug and that they're going to become rich from that. Animal experimentation doesn't result in life-saving drugs. It doesn't result in cures. And you get the sort of person who gets frustrated with their work and then just is somehow able to go into their work every morning, torture animals, and then go home to their family and go home to possibly their own pets. And these people just frankly, they're sick. I mean, there's something wrong going on with them, that they can torture animals for 8 hours a day and then go home and have some sort of normal life.
Are you telling me that the end does not justify the means? In theory, were it to be a positive end and really work out, you're telling me the end doesn't justify the means?
As exploitation of any individual or human or non-human ends aren't going to justify the means. We're not going to achieve life-saving drugs. We're not going to be able to develop all these cures for problems that we now have, for illnesses that we now have. And likewise, we're not going to be seeing that just because we can buy a shirt for $5 because it was made in a sweatshop by underpaid workers, the benefit is not that. There's no great benefit there.
Now, sometimes animals are starved or kept at like a 80% body weight on purpose, because if you're looking for a behavior or performance of some sort, there'll be more motivation with a reward, so to speak, of food if you keep the animal very lean. Do you know of that kind of circumstance?
Well, I mean, it's really the starvation is to get them to sometimes to get the results that they want on the test. That what happens with an underweight individual who's on this medication. A lot of actually that's done with drug testing. Again, at the Harvard Medical School run Regional Primate Research Center in Southborough, and then really throughout the Boston area, there's a lot of drug studies going on, and I mean drugs by alcohol, tobacco, and then other drugs like cocaine and heroin, where these primates are addicted to these drugs, these substances, that they wouldn't otherwise be normally consuming, to see what it does, for instance, say to a pregnant primate mother. What happens to the child that's born, the offspring? Or what happens after the offspring is born when you then addict the mother? Does the mother then ignore the offspring? So it's these sorts of starvation techniques can be used to get animals to take things they wouldn't otherwise consume.
So let's say they have starvation or low body weight technique. How do they get the animals to consume the drugs? What's the method?
I mean,
you put it in the food, or? You
could put it in the food, for instance, and then you could slowly decrease the amount of food to the point where the animal no longer cares about food and just wants the drug. that would certainly be one method. Again, these methods aren't so much as talked about as they are so much as they are done. It is
because how would you get monkeys to be on cocaine, which I
mean,
know
you
is
have
done? How would you do that?
I mean, you have to somehow get them to consume it. So either you're injecting it or you're putting it in their food.
Now I know. Oh yes, that's true. Injectable. I know when studies were done on cigarettes, forced inhalation used to be masks forcing the inhalation used to be done.
There are similar studies still going on that are federally funded out of Southborough, where primates are infant primates are put into a sort of box around their head, and then aerosol fumes and other toxic fumes are sprayed into their face for several hours a day for several weeks, and then they're killed and cut open to see what sort of deterioration has occurred to their lungs.
And what's the method of killing?
Well, I mean, I suppose researchers might say that they use some sort of injectable drug that kills them, that's supposed to be painless. But as we've seen with the undercover investigations inside of Huntingdon Life Sciences, that although animals are said to be dead, they're still very much alive. We have videotape footage from the United States of a primate whose rib cage is being cut open while his heart still beats inside the rib cage. And that animal was meant to be dead during the autopsy surgery.
Now, in other words, it's easy to be careless because, after all, let's look at the premise. The premise is you're using these things as objects. You're using them and you want them to be as stable and fixed and manipulable as possible, obviously, because you're looking at so-called science, which requires as precise a result as possible. So therefore, you're using them like you would use a camera or a pencil sharpener or any tool that you would use. So that in and of itself, and especially the need to have things fixed and come out the way, you know, have all the many variables that would be in a living situation, have those controlled. So given that kind of a premise, it would probably be very easy to treat the situation just as that.
Well, you use the word careless, and I wouldn't use the word careless. Careless kind of, it connotates, oops, I sort of didn't mean to do it that way. I would use the word sloppy science. These people don't care what they're doing. They just want to get the job done. They want the results that they kind of want. If they forget to record results, they forge the documentation. They write down numbers. They say that they've administered drugs when they have not administered drugs. And the end goal is, with these toxicology studies and with these products that companies are paying, for instance, Huntingdon Life Sciences, to get out on the market, Huntingdon Life Sciences will forge the research and will forge the documentation so that the products can get out on the market, because that's how they make their money.
Now, I think many listeners might be questioning, well, how do you know they forge things? How can you say that?
In 2000, a slew of documents, the largest leak of documents out from a laboratory, was received by the Mirror, a UK paper. The documents revealed a study that Huntingdon Life Sciences was conducting that involved transplanting pig hearts to wild-caught baboons. This study was being conducted for a company called Novartis, or Immutron, and in it there's a series of documentation in which Immutron would send these scathing communiques to Huntingdon Life Sciences, telling them how incompetent they were, how they were screwing up their research, how they were just making a mess of all the data. They weren't keeping track of it, they didn't really know what they were doing, and how there was no way that the results would ever be able to be published in a study. Some of the things in that study were, and some of those things in those documents, researchers were saying that they never saw it, they don't know what they were talking about, it never happened, and that was in regards to administering a drug. There was one instance. So
Novartis was accusing Huntington of
Novartis was flat out saying that Huntingdon Life Sciences didn't know what they were doing. And
but did they accuse them of fraud, more or less, or?
If they had actually published a study or delivered the research to Novartis, they would have accused them of fraud, I believe.
And where can people look up information on
this?
You know, critiques of whether, you know, studies are really being done the way?
There's several different websites. first off, the website for the campaign in the United States is SHACUSA, SHACUSA.net. That details the 5 undercover investigations into Huntington Life Sciences. You can also look at the UK page from the United Kingdom campaign, which is where the campaign began 2 years ago, and that's just shac.net, SHAC.net, obviously. There's a slew of other pages that you can get that are linked off of those. Another very good page of an organization that has been to a degree involved in the campaign as far as critiquing those studies and sending out pamphlets and information to suspected clients and potential clients of Huntington Life Sciences is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, a group of doctors who have come together to work using their medical knowledge to end animal experimentation and animal agriculture and the consumption of animals. And their website is pcrm.org. And
well, we'll have those addresses later on in the show as well. Now back to the beagles, the hapless beagles at Huntingdon who are right now, and primates in Southborough, and before we even continue, about how many facilities between universities and private companies are in the metropolitan area? Are there a slew of them right now doing research on animals? In the Boston area, greater Boston area? There's quite a number. Boston is probably one of the world's, as far as an area, Boston's probably one of the world's largest animal research areas. We have a lot of different companies from private to the public research institutions, and then ones that are, and many, almost all of whom are receiving federal funding of some degree. What are a couple of the private ones? Right on the Charles River, between Boston and Cambridge, is Genzyme. They do xenotransplantation work, which is transplanting an organ from one species into another species. It's an attempt to find, can we use other species' organs for organ transplantation? And Genzyme is a publicly traded company, is it? I believe they're publicly traded, because I've seen some information about their stocks. And which universities are involved? Are all of them involved? Or? Not every single one. For instance, although Brandeis University is quickly becoming a leading research institution, they don't actually do animal experimentation. They have animals on campus, but they mostly do sort of things like cholesterol studies and gene research. As far as local institutions, Harvard Medical School, MIT, Boston University Medical School is actually the last medical school in the state to require their first-year medical students to cut open live animals. Tufts has a lot of animal research. But yes, the veterinarian. At their veterinarian school, at their medical school downtown, and at the college. Now at MIT there must be a lot of studies that deal with the brain, neural tissue, because they have the brain and cognitive science department there. I've never. Well, there is one study that I'm familiar with from MIT that they are doing an eye research study, and that study is actually being duplicated. This study was done on primates, and we have pictures from that study as well. But that study was being duplicated at close to 50 other institutions across the country, and is being duplicated in cats and other animals at other institutions. Okay, so back to the beagle now. So we have people taking the beagles. You say they're not necessarily one to a cage at Huntington Life Sciences. What are they, just milling around in a room? They'll be milling around in a small cage. In a small cage. So say if an animal hasn't had any research done on them, has had no blood taken, they might be taken from a group of animals. Okay, and then what happens? The researcher will then proceed to do the studies. That may require shaving part of the animal in order to get blood work going, to get veins in, to start some sort of IV-like drug flow. And typically, because these beagles are so young, and again, this is what was documented in 1997, is that Huntington Life Sciences would use 4-month-old beagle puppies, and when the researchers couldn't find a vein, they would just jab and poke, hoping to find it. And when they got frustrated, they would shake the beagles around and they would punch them in the face. And this just wasn't an isolated incident. This was occurring regularly. Kind of like what humans can do to children if you listen to stories of. And it's been well documented that animal abuse leads to child abuse and other forms of human abuse. Well, there was some governor, I've forgotten who, some years ago, who said no abuse, no cruelty, no anything bad of people towards people will ever stop until cruelty to animals stops.
That's very true.
That's like the root, the spring of it, of it all.
Because as we're seeing, it's easy for young boys, 8 or 9, to take BB guns and pellet guns and shoot animals or catch frogs and cut off their heads. And then it graduates to a larger stage when they're older, where they're prone to aggressive acts against other humans.
And we also see those commercials now that are so bad for animals, like the frogs, the squirrels or whatever, give each other the high five because the car didn't flatten them out, and like that's cool and easy. All this misuse of animals, of how they really are in the wild, for beer drinking or butting heads with a ram. So bad, so bad. But back to, so then what happens? They pick out a dog, they try to get a
blood sample.
And they do get a blood sample, and then what? As far as the toxic substance, how is that?
I mean, it can proceed in a number of different ways. Some of those animals may be separated into the sample group, and in which they are, or in the study group, there's a group of animals that aren't having any drugs injected to them, or having a certain level of drugs injected to them, and then the other animals may have increasingly larger percentages or portions of the drugs injected into them or fed to them. And they may have increasingly different things done to them, where they may, in one instance, might be starved, might be fed once a day, might be given only water, might be only given solid foods.
To see what happens under different circumstances, so
yes.
to speak.
Exactly.
Sort of the independent variables and how they affect, yes. And so then if they become ill and they're laying there with labored breathing or whatever, then what happens? Does that happen? I'm assuming
it certainly
happens
does.
a lot.
I mean, animals in Huntington Life Sciences are described as living in their own vomit and congealed blood. Researchers have been said they don't refer to animals as dying, they refer to them as rotting. And when an animal is dying, instead of putting the animal out of their misery and stopping the suffering, these researchers will just leave the animals there to suffer and to prolong their death.
Why?
Because they're cruel people. They're not.
You think so?
I definitely.
Negligence, in other words.
It's negligence, but it goes so far that it's.
But don't they maybe want to even study? Aren't they
well,
studying
sometimes
them
the study will end and the animals will still be rotting, as they call it, and they just leave the animals that way. It's a quote from a Huntington Life Sciences employee is, "No animal gets out of here alive."
Right, we've heard that quote before. There was a quote during the World War II and the Nazi camps.
It's very similar. I mean,
the only way out is through the chimney or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar that these sorts of places are, as they've been described as animal Auschwitz.
They are concentration camps.
Yes, they are. Certainly they are.
Yes, they are. Now, there's so all they use is beagles?
No, Huntington Life Sciences uses a variety of animals. We talk about the beagles a lot because they love to use beagles, and they use a lot of them. Huntington Life Sciences will also use primates, cows, cats, fish, birds, mice, and rats, and rabbits. And I think that might be about all.
There's an awful lot of security around laboratories, isn't there? I mean, people can't really go and...
It sort of depends. As far as the two Huntington Life Sciences laboratories in England, people have broken into the labs, people have gotten into the property. At this point, Huntington Life Sciences, their main laboratory in Huntingdon, England, they were building a moat. Here in the United States, security is not so tight, which is why on April 1st of this year, 14 beagles were liberated from Huntington Life Sciences in New Jersey. That means that they were taken from those labs, never to suffer again, at the hands of these researchers, and replaced in good, loving homes.
Well, I didn't so much mean to break in, but I just meant in general, it's not an open kind of situation where you can go and view it.
Some places will claim that they give tours. Huntington Life.
Some places give tours?
They will claim that they do. Huntington Life Sciences obviously has given tours to their investors, but they'll clean it up. They'll put the suffering animals away, and they'll make it seem like it's a good place, that the animals are happy, and that's just completely not true. They really, I mean, they can turn their image around and make it look like it's clean, but the bottom line is it's still a filthy business, and it's not making any money anyway.
Right. Well, whether it makes money or not, like I say, really has no bearing.
Well, as far as animal experimentation is considered a big business.
It is, yes.
And that's why there's so much of it going on. That's why, at this very point, 70,000 animals are imprisoned inside of Huntingdon Life Sciences. And on this very day, 500 animals will die inside those labs.
And death will be kinder than life.
For them, it very well may be.
Death will be kinder than life.
But as a big business, as there are corporations with lots of money who are pushing it, trying to keep the regulations very low, trying to keep government wanting these wanting animal testing, we've seen that investment firms and international banks have wanted to invest in companies like Huntingdon Life Sciences, and that's really the focal point of the campaign to close them down, is that we've gone after their financial investors, and that's why we've been so successful at making them. I mean, they were on the verge of closure 1 year ago, and they're still on the verge of closure. Their share price is less than a cent these days.
Oh, they're publicly traded company as well?
Yes, they're publicly traded. Their share price is about 1/10 of a cent. It's been that way for about 2.5, 3 weeks now. They just transferred over their listing out of the United Kingdom, which according to their managing director would concede that they had lost if they ever left England, and are now attempting to be traded on the NASDAQ under a different name based out of Maryland, under the name of Life Science Research, but they're still Huntingdon Life Sciences for all intents and purposes. At this point, they're not even being traded because they can't find anyone to make a market for them, to be a market maker and to push their shares, because we've been so effective at targeting these people almost completely through phone and emails that no one wants to deal with Huntingdon Life Sciences. It's just not worth the bother for them.
So you're just trying to show that what they do poorly at the expense of animals, but it's a step certainly, but then the larger question of doing it at all, even in the best of circumstances, you know, with cute little cuddly beds for the animals and little lullabies when they go to sleep.
What we're saying, what Shaq is saying, is that animal experimentation is wrong. And what we're doing is we're finding, I guess you could say, the Achilles heel of Huntingdon Life Sciences, finding where they're the weakest. We could stand outside their laboratories and hold protest signs and yell at the workers through megaphones for all we wanted, and it was done for close to 30 years. But in the last 2 years, we've targeted every financial investor, every major financial investor. We've targeted their shareholders, and I use the word targeted because I feel it's the most appropriate one. It doesn't mean that we go out there and we scream in their faces. It may mean that we ask everyone in the United States to call this investment firm, to call this bank, to call them all day, every day for 1 week, to send them email after email, to send them letter after letter, and tell them to pull out of Huntingdon Life Sciences. And consistently, investment firms have learned that dealing with Huntingdon Life Sciences and dealing with animal cruelty simply is not worth it.
I see. So that's your motive. And when people write these emails, do they say because their practices are shoddy, or do they say we don't want animal research?
I can't say what everyone writes in their email. The general form letter that goes out in the email that goes out every week to say who is the investor of the week, as we call it, says that you as an investor have the ability to make an ethical investment, that animal experimentation is not productive and frankly it's unsafe.
We'll be stopping here, and people do know that should they want to take a stand or try to help animals, that like has been suggested by Ethan, you could write to companies that are doing investments financially in these firms, helping support them as a good means to get at the animal research horrible thing for animals that it is. And thank you for being here, Ethan.
Right. Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's a sad topic. I notice. I think you have a lot of sort of anger about the topic. Maybe I could. Yeah. I mean, but more than anger, it's a very sad thing. So, thank you for listening, and please help animals any way you can, and please know that they're suffering right now in laboratories all around Boston and the world. Good night.
Ex-workers have informed us that the following scenes are not isolated incidents, but are in fact an everyday occurrence.
Shit.
Can't find a vein.
No, is the word. They're too young.
They are ours, aren't they?
The dogs are too young. Too young for the veins are too small.
Stay nice and still. Stay nice and still, sweet. That's good.
Sit back too far, he's pissed everywhere. You've had your shot. Fucking sit still. I haven't got the patience today, I really haven't.
Now settle down.
Oh, there anyway. Oh, that's about dog. For a shake. Here, well, anyway.
Oh.
Right. Certainly does. Fucking hell! I'm really getting fucking bad with you! Every fucking time point!
Come here, Robert. You're in here.
Many of the substances tested by Huntingdon have already been tested elsewhere. Beagle dogs are used because of their passive nature and unwillingness to bite. At their New Jersey laboratory, shown here, similar acts of cruelty were also taking place. This dog is obviously fitting and in distress. The supervisor instructed the investigator not to report its condition. Copies of this footage were sent to all of Huntington's clients, including Glaxo Wellcome, Seneca, and Smith & Nephew. Many of these vowed never to use Huntington again.
Don't hit me with him. Oh, don't.
These technicians clearly enjoy their work.
Calm down before I bite your face! Pogo! Pogo! Spin, 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 spin! Boom, 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 boom.
God, there's like nice skin here to touch. I know.
Huntington was cited by the U.S. Department of Agriculture on 5 counts of breaches of animal welfare laws. On this occasion, Huntington managed to buy themselves out of trouble.